and welcome to the Sheldon Show. Now, usually I'm interviewing someone, but part of what I want to do with this channel is to talk about things, by myself, talk about things that I feel are critical if you want to live a better life, right? In addition to some of the stuff that I'm sure that you will hear from my guest as well. But I want to do about a 10 or 12 part series about things that I think are critical to if you want to live a good life. So I also want to encourage you, please do not forget to subscribe, and I would also welcome your comments so that we could have a discussion with the topics that I'm going to be talking about. Today's topic is, I want to talk about the way we think and how does our thinking impact or affect the way that we live our lives and affect the outcome of our lives. So there is something that is called deficit thinking, right? And deficit thinking, if you could kind of separate the two words, first, when you think of deficit is obviously something that is in the negative, right? If we're going to use money as a comparison. And thinking obviously is the thought process that each and every one of us have. So deficit thinking, which really comes from the academic world, and it's usually used to explain students, immigrant students, or students in urban schools, minority students who are not performing well in school. And one of the things usually attributed to that is deficit thinking. The whole idea behind deficit thinking is that the person is entering into whatever the situation is with a negative mindset. So they're saying that when someone from a minority family or an immigrant family or someone who goes to an urban school, predominantly minority schools, that a lot of times that these students have deficit thinking, which means one of the reasons why they're probably not performing well in school is because they don't come in with that positive mindset. And part of the reason why they probably don't come with that positive mindset is perhaps attributed to the environment where they grow up and maybe the home that they grow up in, because obviously those two things impact the way that we think and the way that we see the world. Our environment has a huge impact on us, and obviously the family or the household that we grow up in does have a huge impact on us as well. So I'm going to talk about deficit thinking not in terms of how we necessarily perform, how someone can necessarily perform in school, but more so how we make decisions and how we live our lives. So I've included in front of that the word cognitive. And if you think of the word cognitive, C-O-G-N-I-T-I-V-E, right, and you think of cognition, you think of a thought process, a mentality that we have. And cognitive or cognition, we're talking about your perception of reality and all that type of stuff comes from the whole idea of cognitive. So I took deficit thinking and I put the word cognitive next to it to really reinforce what goes on in our brains and the way we look at stuff. And together I'm going to call this cognitive deficit thinking, right? And then now I'm going to explain to you what that is. I believe that one of the reasons why we don't do good in our lives, one of the reasons why we make some of the mistakes that we make, one of the reasons why we're perhaps not successful at some of the things that we wish we could be successful at, or maybe relationships or whatever the case is because we practice cognitive deficit thinking. Now let me break down what that is, and I have my notes with me. So cognitive is knowing, it's perceiving, it's a mental process. So it's your thought process. So think about what kind of thought process do you have? Are you someone who's always thinking positive? Or are you someone who's always pessimistic, right? Never looking at the bright side of things. And anytime something happens, your first or your initial reaction is to be negative. And that initial reaction usually becomes your reaction for everything. And it's usually a prolonged reaction, right? So the way you handle anything that happens is because you're negative about it. So let's just think about it. Let me put it in the idea of, or let me put it in To help make it make some more sense, let's compare it to sports, for example. So let's just say that you take 10 3-point shots, right? And you didn't make any of them. So then what happens is, obviously you missed the shots, right? Are you going to take the next shot? Are you the person, or are you going to have a negative mindset when you hold the ball for the 11th time? Are you already thinking, I'm going to miss? If you're already thinking you're going to miss with the 11th shot, chances are you're going to miss. And that is because you have now developed a mindset that is really negative. And that's very difficult to get over, right? So we're gonna continue a little bit more with that, but that's the cognitive side of it. The next side is deficit. So deficit means that there is a lack of something. In this case, there could be a lack of positive thinking. That's what's lacking, right? Or there's a deficiency. The deficiency is that sometimes, because of the environments that we grow up in, the neighborhood that we grow up in, the household that we grow up in, the friends that we have a tendency to always want to look on the negative side of things. And if you do that so often enough, as you've probably heard, and a lot of research would say as well, is that becomes the type of attitude that you have. So your attitude before taking the shot and your mentality before taking that 3-pointer shot is that I'm probably not going to make this anyway. So what are your chances of not making it? It's very good. So that is the deficiency that I'm talking about. And then there's thinking. Thinking definition is this goes with your thoughts, the way we reflect on things, the way we perceive things, obviously. So then what is your general thought process? That's something to think about. So kind of putting it all together, cognitive deficit thinking, for this example and for the point that I'm trying to make, is someone who more often than not is very negative in the way that they look at certain things. So when things happen to you in your life, and things happen to all of us, but when things happen to you in your life, maybe you have a tendency to be too negative. And then if you're too negative, then it's very difficult to overcome, the difficulties that would definitely lie ahead, because we're all going to face difficulties. And we've all heard that stuff is going to happen, and what is really important is not just that it's going to happen, but the fact is, how do you respond to something when it actually happens? All right. So some of the things that could reinforce cognitive deficit thinking is experiences that we've had in our lives. You've had a lot of negative experiences with certain things, and because of that, you allow those negative experiences to hang on to you too much, right? And you're not able to always overcome them when you need to. And as I said, because of that, then you find yourself always dealing with everything negative. So two people facing the same situation, one person is more of an optimistic, positive type of mindset. The other person is not optimistic. They're more of a pessimistic type of mindset. Who is more likely to overcome the difficulty that they're faced with? Perhaps it's going to be the person who has more of that positive, optimistic type of outlook. They are not necessarily struggling with just dealing with negativity and constantly just thinking negative. So that's something that I want to encourage you to do. Look around in your life and reflect. Is it your finances? Is it your relationship? Is it school? Because this whole idea of deficit thinking and the deficit thinking theory is certainly academic. So is it school? Is it your relationship? Is it your life? Is it your finances? Whatever the case is. And how are you approaching and dealing with things when they happen to you? Are you always negative? And then are you surrounding yourself with people who are just completely negative? And all they want to do is to remind you of how bad life is, right? Like, if we don't know that already, instead of coming up with ideas and ways to solve problems and solutions. So you've got to make sure that you're not struggling with deficit thinking. Now, I wrote down a couple of things that I think are necessary to breaking it. One is changing your environment. Because sometimes, the people that you surround yourself with and the general area where you may live, it's just toxic to anything that is productive and to breaking that cycle of negative thinking. Now, not everyone can move from their neighborhood, right? Not everyone can just pick up and move because they want to be able to do that. So maybe you've got to change your friends. If you can't change your immediate environment, maybe you have to look at who your friends are. Because maybe they're encouraging you to just be negative. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you got to start going to church and expand your network of people and get to know people who are more positive. And let me tell you how this worked for me. When I was in school, specifically, I think more so undergrad, pretty much more so undergrad, and not necessarily struggling through school, but when you need that extra support and that extra encouragement and all that, I had really good friends who were there, right? And we were always able to encourage each other, to push each other, to help each other get where we need to go. So, and that's kind of what I'm saying, that one of the strategies that I'm suggesting that you use to break deficit thinking. So change your environment. If you can't, maybe you look to change your friends. The other thing is to read. I think reading is really good, and try to read things that are positive, optimistic books, books that offer solutions for things that you may be going through, right? And maybe have a book club or something like that where you sit and you discuss those solutions and how to overcome the problems that you may be facing. I think the other thing is to realize that perfection does not exist. No one is perfect. And I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves that we forget that, none of us are going to be perfect. All of us make mistakes. And the biggest thing is to really learn from those mistakes and to be able to move on. So remember that there's no such thing as perfection, and you just want to be able to learn from the things that you've been through to make you a better person. All right. And then let me reiterate, please surround yourself with positive people. I think that is a critical thing. There are a lot of theories out there that and I'm not going to get into all that academics right now, but there are a lot of theories out there that would suggest that, and it's common sense, to be quite honest with you. You don't need a theory to tell you. If you're hanging around with people who look at the world a certain way, they're probably going to impact the way you look at the world as well. And sometimes it's difficult for us to get rid of some of those people because they've been in our lives for so long. But then you have to make that decision. What kind of life do I want to live? Are these people who are currently in my life supportive to the life that I want to live? And do I perhaps need to rid myself of some people who are in my life? And that's a decision that, no one could make for you except yourself, right? And the final thing with that is your self-worth. You've got to realize what your self-worth is. And I'll talk about that in another video. So let me just go over to close this up, because I don't want this to be too long. Cognitive deficit thinking is someone who is thinking negatively or looking at things in a pessimistic way more often than not. And if you consistently do something, whether it's good or bad, over and over and over again, you become really good at it. And I really believe, from talking to a lot of people and from doing research and stuff like that, one of the things is people have a tendency to just be too negative. Stuff is going to happen to all of us. How you respond to it, how you deal with it, has a big say with the outcome eventually of whatever that is. And then changing your environment, surrounding yourself with positive people, is a way to deal with that. But you've got to make sure at the end of the day that you just don't always look at things in a negative way, because it hurts relationships as well. If you're just always negative and you can't sit and talk and work things out, you're also going to find yourself struggling, whether it's personal or professional relationships also. So just kind of keep that in mind. So that's the first part of this series to come. Remember, cognitive deficit thinking, that means that, and you've got to examine yourself, are you being too negative? Are you thinking too negative? And if you're thinking too negative, then you need to change maybe your environment, change your friends, change what you read, change what you watch, change your lifestyle, whatever the case is. But that is one of the things that definitely impact us. Cognitive deficit thinking make sure you're not practicing it. So thank you very much again for tuning in and watching my videos. I appreciate it a whole lot. Make sure that you subscribe and leave your comments below so that I know if you disagree with me, and even if you don't disagree, if you just want to elaborate on this a little bit more, and maybe I could do a follow-up video specifically to this. But leave your comments so that we could discuss this in chat. Make sure to follow, make sure to subscribe as well. And I'll see you next time when we continue this series with how to live a better life. Make sure you're not practicing CDT, cognitive deficit thinking. Thank you.